It all started with a ridiculous letter slipped under our front door on a crisp Saturday morning. My mom picked it up off the welcome mat, her coffee still steaming in her hand, and read it aloud to the rest of us in the kitchen. The note was from the Meadowview Homeowners Association, HOA, and it wasn't exactly neighborly. In stiff, formal language, it informed us that parking our family's minivan in our own driveway was now prohibited under a new rule they'd apparently cooked up at their last meeting. The reason? It was an eyesore that disrupted the aesthetic harmony of the community. I nearly choked on my cereal when I heard that. Our minivan wasn't some rusted junker. It was a perfectly decent silver Honda Odyssey, maybe a little scratched from years of soccer practice runs, but hardly an offense to anyone's eyes. My dad, sitting at the table with his newspaper, didn't say much at first. He just folded the paper down, took off his reading glasses, and gave Mom that look, the one that said he was already plotting something. Dad's a banker, the kind of guy who spent 30 years crunching numbers and shaking hands at First National Bank. He's not loud or flashy, but he's got this quiet way of handling things that makes you realize he's always 3 steps ahead. "Let me see that letter," he said, holding out his hand. Mom passed it over, and he scanned it, his lips pressing into a thin line. "Aesthetic harmony," he muttered, shaking his head. What a load of nonsense. The thing is, we lived in Meadowview for over a decade, longer than half the people on the HOA board. Our house was a modest 2-story with a neat lawn and a driveway that until now had never caused a stir. We weren't troublemakers. Mom volunteered at the community garden. My little sister Sarah sold Girl Scout cookies door to door, and I mowed lawns for extra cash in the summer. We were about as normal as it gets. So why the HOA decided to pick a fight with us over a minivan was beyond me. Later that day, I overheard Mom and Dad talking in the living room. "It's not just about the van, Tom," Mom was saying, her voice tight. "It's the principle. They can't tell us what we can do on our own property." Dad nodded, leaning back in his recliner. "I know, Ellen, but you know how these HOA types are. Give them a clipboard and a rule book, and they think they're kings of the cul-de-sac. Don't worry, I'll handle it." "Handle it how?" I asked, poking my head in from the hallway. Dad just smirked and said, "You'll see, Jake." That was classic Dad, never tipping his hand until the game was already won. The next week, we got a second letter. This one wasn't so polite. It said we'd been observed parking the minivan in the driveway again, guilty as charged. It's where we parked it for years. And if we didn't comply with the new rule within 7 days, we'd face a $200 fine. There was even a grainy photo attached, time-stamped from some nosy neighbor's security camera, showing the van sitting innocently in our driveway. Sarah, who's only 10 and loves drama, gasped when she saw it. "They're spying on us," she cried, clutching her stuffed bunny like we were in a crime movie. Mom rolled her eyes, but I could tell she was fed up too. Dad, though? He didn't flinch. He just tucked the letter into his briefcase and went off to work like it was any other Monday. I figured he'd call a lawyer or something. Maybe dig up some old property deed to prove the HOA was overstepping. But when I asked him about it that night, he just said, "Patience, Jake. These things take time." Meanwhile, the neighborhood started buzzing. Mrs. Carter, who lives across the street and always has her nose in everyone's business, stopped by to check in, read gossip. She told Mom the new driveway rule came from Linda Grayson, the HOA president. Linda was a retired real estate agent with a perm and a superiority complex, and she'd been on a mission to elevate Meadowview ever since she got elected. Apparently, she'd decided our minivan didn't fit her vision of a pristine, magazine-worthy suburb. "She's got half the board wrapped around her finger," Mrs. Carter said, sipping the tea Mom had offered her. "They're all scared of her, except maybe Phil Dawson, but he's too lazy to argue." I didn't know much about Linda, but I'd seen her around, always in pressed blouses and heels, barking orders at the landscapers, or glaring at kids riding bikes too fast. She was the type who'd fine you for a weed in your yard and then brag about it at the next meeting. The more I thought about it, the madder I got. This wasn't just about a van, it was about control. Linda and her cronies were flexing their power, and we were the unlucky targets. Mom tried to stay calm, saying we should just park the van on the street and avoid the hassle, but Dad wouldn't hear it. "Ellen, if we give in now, what's next? They'll tell us we can't plant tomatoes in the backyard because they clash with the azaleas?" He had a point. Meadowview was our home, not Linda Grayson's personal kingdom. A few days later, I came home from school to find Dad in the garage, tinkering with the minivan's oil filter. "You're not moving it, are you?" I asked, worried he'd caved. He wiped his hands on a rag and grinned. "Nope, just keeping her in fighting shape. This van's not going anywhere, except right back in the driveway." That's when I knew he had a plan. Dad didn't mess around when it came to standing his ground. Sure enough, the deadline came and went, and the minivan stayed put. The HOA didn't waste time. They slapped us with the $200 fine, delivered by certified mail like it was some big legal victory. Sarah wanted to frame the photo they'd sent as evidence and hang it in her room, but Mom vetoed that idea. Instead, Dad sat down at his desk that night, pulled out his laptop, and started typing. I peeked over his shoulder, expecting a fiery email to the HOA, but all I saw were spreadsheets, columns of names, numbers, and bank codes. "What's that?" I asked. He didn't look up. "Just some homework," he said, his voice calm but edged with something I couldn't quite place. I didn't press him. With Dad, you learn to wait and watch. The neighborhood tension kept building. At the next HOA meeting, which Mom dragged us all to, Linda Grayson stood at the front of the community center, wielding her gavel like a scepter. She wore a smug smile as she listed off violations, including ours. "The Miller family has chosen to ignore our reasonable request," she said, peering over her glasses at us. "This is about maintaining standards, not personal attacks." A few people nodded, but others shifted uncomfortably in their seats. Phil Dawson, the lazy board member Mrs. Carter had mentioned, yawned loudly, earning a glare from Linda. Mom squeezed Dad's hand under the table, probably worried he'd say something sharp, but he just sat there, silent, his face unreadable. When it was our turn to speak, Dad stood up, buttoning his jacket like he was about to close a deal at the bank. "Linda," he said evenly, "I've read the HOA bylaws front to back. There's nothing in there about banning vehicles from driveways, only about keeping them off the street overnight. This rule you've made up, it's not enforceable, and frankly, it's absurd." The room went quiet. Linda's smile faltered, but she recovered fast. "The board has the authority to interpret the bylaws as we see fit," she snapped. "If you don't like it, pay the fine or take it up with a lawyer." Dad nodded like he'd expected that answer. "Good to know," he said, sitting back down. That was it. No yelling, no threats, just those 3 words. But something about the way he said them made the hair on my neck stand up. On the way home, Mom was fuming. "She's insufferable. Did you see how she talked down to us?" Sarah chimed in. "Yeah, she's like a mean principal." I looked at Dad, waiting for him to weigh in, but he just stared out the windshield, a faint smile tugging at his lips. "What's so funny?" I asked. He glanced at me in the rearview mirror. "Oh, nothing. Just thinking about interest rates." That made no sense at the time, but I let it go. Dad's brain worked in mysterious ways. The fines kept coming, $200, then $400, then $600. Linda even sent a tow truck one afternoon, but Dad was home and waved them off, citing private property laws. The driver didn't argue. He just shrugged and drove away. The whole thing was turning into a standoff, and the neighbors were picking sides. Mrs. Carter started a petition to rein in the HOA, while Linda's loyalists whispered about troublemakers ruining the community. It was chaos, and our little minivan was at the center of it all. Then about a month in, something shifted. I came home from school to find Dad on the phone in his office, his tone clipped and professional. "Yes, that's correct," he was saying. "Declined. Insufficient documentation. Tell them to reapply next quarter." He hung up and saw me standing there. "Work stuff?" I asked. He nodded. "Something like that." But there was a glint in his eye, a hunter's glint. I should have known then that the game was about to change. It started with a rumor. Mrs. Carter burst into our kitchen one Saturday, breathless, her teacup trembling in her hand. "You won't believe this," she said. "Linda's loan for that fancy remodel she's been bragging about? Denied. Flat out denied by First National." Mom raised an eyebrow. "That's odd. She's been planning that for months. New deck, gourmet kitchen, the works." Mrs. Carter leaned in, her voice dropping to a whisper. "And that's not all. Phil Dawson got turned down for a car loan yesterday. And the Hendersons? Their mortgage refinance? Rejected. All at your husband's bank. She looked at Dad, who was calmly slicing an apple at the counter. Tom, you wouldn't know anything about this, would you? Dad didn't miss a beat. Banks make decisions based on risk, Nancy, he said, popping a slice into his mouth. Sometimes the numbers just don't add up. Mrs. Carter squinted at him, like she wasn't buying it, but she didn't push. I, on the other hand, was starting to connect the dots. Linda, Phil, the Hendersons, they were all on the HOA board. And Dad? He wasn't just any banker. He was a senior loan officer with the power to approve or deny applications. Was this his plan all along? The next week, the neighborhood was a soap opera. Linda stormed around, telling anyone who'd listen that First National was incompetent and she'd be taking her business elsewhere. Phil grumbled about having to keep his old clunker another year. The Hendersons put their for sale sign back in the yard after their refinance fell through. And Dad? He went to work every day like nothing was wrong, whistling as he backed the minivan out of the driveway, just to park it right back there when he got home. The breaking point came at the following HOA meeting. Linda was red-faced, slamming her gavel so hard I thought it'd snap. This is harassment, she shouted, pointing at Dad. You're using your position to punish us. The room erupted, half the crowd cheering her on, the other half muttering about her tyranny. Dad stood up, calm as ever. Linda, I don't control the bank's policies. I just enforce them. If your applications didn't meet the criteria, that's on you. Maybe you should have spent less time policing my driveway and more time balancing your books. It was a mic drop moment. Even Phil Dawson sat up straight, blinking like he'd just woken up. Linda didn't have a comeback. She just sputtered, her perm practically shaking with rage. The meeting dissolved into chaos, and by the end, Mrs. Carter's petition had enough signatures to call for a vote. 2 weeks later, Linda was out as president, replaced by a quiet guy named Mr. Patel, who promised to focus on potholes, not parking. The driveway rule, scrapped. The fines, waived. And the minivan, it stayed right where it belonged. That night, we celebrated with pizza in the living room. Sarah raised her soda can in a toast. To Dad, the king of revenge. Mom laughed, but Dad just shook his head. Not revenge, Sarah. Strategy. Sometimes you don't need to fight. You just need to know where the real power lies. I looked at him, grinning. So did you really tank their loans? He winked. Let's just say I'm very good at my job. And that was that. The HOA never bothered us again. Linda moved to a condo downtown with no remodel budget, and Meadowview settled back into its quiet, normal self. The minivan's still in the driveway, a little scratched but victorious. As for Dad, he's still the same quiet guy with the newspaper. Except now, when he folds it down, I know better than to underestimate him. Thank you for watching Touching Story. If this story moved you, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more powerful tales of resilience and justice. See you in the next one.